Hello again. This is Mike Siver on the Mike Siver Show with my guest Carrie Sluter. And this is going to be the third part to a series, and we don't know how many parts we're going to have yet, but we're still going on, about growing up versus maturity in adults and young people. And before I forget, because sometimes we talk so much we run out of time at the end of the show, if anyone watching wants to call or email and be on the show as a guest and ask me questions or Carrie questions or have an opinion of what we're talking about that you want to express, please give me a call, give the show a call, and email me, and we'll go from there. We'd love to have you on, whoever you are out there. All right. Last week we talked more about growing up versus maturity and how they're not synonymous. So many people think just because I'm an adult today that I'm an adult, and with that comes maturity. And there's so many quotes out there, so many different things out there that must have come about because of people's lack of maturity. And one quote that I use a lot in my counseling practice is, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything will look like a nail. So any problems you have that you come across, whether they be a driver that's maybe not using the same courtesy that you think you should use, or pulling a window shade down and all of a sudden it falls off in your hands. And if you get angry about all these things really quick, that's showing a lack of maturity. Now, there's times to get frustrated, and there's a time to get anger. Anger has a purpose. Anger has a positive purpose if you use it correctly. And that means something in the situation you're doing is going so wrong that you're not dealing with it very well. You got to take a step back and figure out why it's gone from this frustration to anger.
Bad to worse.
From bad to worse really quick.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, like in the books that I write, what role did I play in getting myself in this situation? Now, I know you've had a lot to say about this, Carrie, because we've talked a little bit. So I'm going to let you go, and we'll see where we go. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show. One of the biggest things that I see with your topic of growing up versus maturity, I see that a lot in the things I'm dealing with immediately, the immediate situations. When my daughter was when she was very young, I brought her up, with talking to her a lot, spending more time with her. With one child, it's different when you have 5. So my daughter was always very attentive to my expressions, but it was always, I had the same simple rules. Somebody else didn't come in the mix and be able to leave their shoes. She knew the rule was your shoes go here. So taking that back to growing up versus maturity, for me, I handled things differently, and I think the point you're trying to make is they're not synonymous. Just because you're grown doesn't mean you're acting in maturity.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
That's the point we're trying to make.
Yep.
So for me, I was more mature at 30 with one child than I have found myself behaving at older, much older, with 5 children or 4 children.
Right.
Okay? And that's because it's more frustrating. You had mentioned, that, as parents, we get so caught up in the moment. We're dealing with marriage situations. We're dealing with kids, and we're dealing with socks on the floor. We're dealing with, one that's not doing good in school. We have so many things that are occupying our time. Patience, we lose patience easier. Yep. So I was more mature then in the way I was handling things. But yet I was more mature in my business because I was calmer.
Right.
Okay? And so going back, now 20 years later, 24 years later, I'm finding that I'm having to retrain myself on how to be as mature in my decision making and the way I handle things, because it's a whole different situation. There's more frustration and things like that. So that's the first thing I wanted to, enlighten on, is the point of the maturity versus being grown. It's how you handle things at the moment. And maturity is shown in the way you handle things. It's not in your age. Even in the Bible, of course, I have to take everything back to that.
Yep.
People didn't become actually credible with what they had to say until they were at the age of at least 30. They didn't become a man and have any position until
Right,
they were
okay.
age 30. Now, I don't know about other people, but 90% of us, I think, really have a turning point at 30. It's all of a sudden, wow, have I ever, if I had known then what I know now. So anyways, there's that side of it too, is that the Bible even documents that Jesus Christ didn't even step up until age 30.
Well, some of the stuff you're saying, two things you said reminded me of things I've dealt with clients. One is parents, either
Mm-hmm.
single parents or a couple,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with children, leaving stuff around the house. You said socks on the floor. It drives every parent nuts, drove me nuts from my first wife, and it's something that all children do until they learn they have to pick them up. But how you react to that
Exactly.
shows your maturity to them,
Right.
because that's called situational learning.
Mm-hmm.
They know when they leave a mess around the house, or they don't make their bed, or whatever they're asked to do on a certain level, that mom is going to get mad or mom is going to handle it right.
They already know that when they leave them shoes there.
They know that, but they still do. And how you respond to that shows your maturity level to them, and how they will respond to that when they
they deal
become
with it.
a mom or a dad in that same situation.
Yes.
And we don't think like that. I wish we did as parents who were just reacting.
Well, yeah. I made some notes on that, and one of my favorite sayings is, did I react or did I act?
Right.
There's action and there's reaction.
Yep.
Those are two different things. And the minute something hits us, we're either going to act or react. If you react, you're working off of the situation. If you're acting, you take that situation and you ponder or think. It's like you had said in your notes to me about the show, that if you stop and think about and ask yourself questions.
Mhm.
Why did this happen? What is the problem? Is this my problem?
Yep.
Stopping and asking ourselves some simple questions before we respond or before we react to a situation. And it's easy to do, Mike. That's what I said. I felt that I found myself, I saw myself as more mature in the result I was getting and the way I responded to my first daughter. 25 years later, I'm starting out with a new family, and things are very different. My daughter knew where to put her shoes. I walk in the living room and there's 6 shoes on the floor that belong to one child, and this is like the 90th time. That's the only one that's got shoes in the living room. How did I react to that, or
Yeah.
did I act? Did I stop and think? And after a while, it's hard to continue for anybody to continue acting. If the acting didn't get you anywhere, we do not leave our shoes. This is where your shoes go. You see this? We try everything.
Right.
Okay, what do we do when the everything doesn't work? Then you start reacting.
Well, that's what some of the stuff
How do you control that?
Yeah. Well, some of the stuff we teach is about the word try to start with.
Right.
And if you try something, and all of us have been told, try it, you might like it.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it
Yeah.
was. It could have been peas when we were kids, or asparagus, or cauliflower, or something.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we loved it, at that stage, we weren't going to admit it. because I didn't want to like this, and I want to get my way.
Right.
But unless we, and it's a little bit off the topic, but unless we teach our children at a certain point that trying can elude to failure, you can teach them to be quitters.
Mm-hmm.
By teaching them to try. If you tell me you try and I accept that, and you don't want to do it, and you tell me you try and I let it go, then I'm teaching you a behavior that's inappropriate.
Right.
So try, in some dictionaries, says eludes to failure if you do enough dictionaries. But what we're working on is getting the tantrums and getting the, if I don't get my way, I'll scream a little bit. If that doesn't work, I'll escalate. And if that doesn't work, I'll escalate more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay up to a point for little children until you teach them real quick that that's not going to work. Mm-hmm. But when you do that as an adult, you have a problem. Mm-hmm. And you and I both know, and out there the audience knows people who, if they don't get their way, get really upset. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't work, they escalate. Mm-hmm. And they escalate. And I don't know if it's connected to, and I'm not going to sit here and say it is, to some of the disastrous behaviors we've had throughout the United States over the last 6 months with the shootings and the stuff like that. Where does that become okay? Mm-hmm. Where does my frustration level get with something, whatever, or whoever, that my end result is like a hammer, I'm going to go shoot them and kill them? Mm-hmm. Where are we at with that as far as maturity level? Is there another way for me to deal with this rather than shoot somebody or beat somebody up or run somebody over with a car? Where do we draw the line as adults to hold other adults accountable in this whole process of growing up? And when do we say that's inappropriate?
Right now.
I know. Today we do it with each other, and I have no problem. And I know you, because I've known you from the past. You will hold me accountable if I say something stupid or do something crazy, and I'm okay with that. Because if I didn't, you wouldn't have said it. Mm-hmm. So I know that in my head. Mm-hmm. And the same with you. I can disagree with you. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe that's not how I would have done it, or maybe you should have looked at it from this point of view. But how many people are like that? How many people can take and divorce behavior from personal feelings? Mm-hmm. And if I'm inappropriate, do I allow people to tell me that? Do I allow people to come into my life and say, that's not cool? Mm-hmm. And do I say to them after they say that, well, I don't want to be your friend anymore because you held me accountable. I don't want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah. We're teaching those behaviors to those around us if we do. We're supposed to handle the things and act on them at the time that they come up.
Yeah. And it's like some of the notes you sent me was maturity is shown in the way we handle and confront problems, adversity, and most of all, everyday life.
Yep. And
that's such a profound statement. Mm-hmm. But how many people think about it during the day?
Well, little just examples of that. What I see when I'm saying that is everyday life. I am the example to these children growing up who are going to be adults one of these days. They're going to start handling things based on what they saw and learned. We are all products of our environment.
Yep.
If you're around a person that cusses a lot and they use the F word all the time, what are you going to be doing next? You'll be using that word. Yep. Unless you really concentrate and block that out and refuse it and acknowledge that you don't use that word around me, please. You can't block it out. You'll be using it if you accept it and accept that. So we're a product of our environment. But little things on how we handle a problem or an issue. For example, the kids come in and constantly in the refrigerator. It can be a simple thing. You don't think about that being a learning experience, but if you're screaming at the children and yelling at them, close that door, and you use cuss words, you are teaching the children. You are the example that's teaching them. Yep. So remaining in control to make a decision. Okay, come here and sit down, please. Do we really take the time to do what's most important is to teach them at the time? Not just say, I told you to, but sit down and take the time to teach them, here's why you need to close that refrigerator door.
All right.
It is costing when you leave it open. The food is, it takes longer for it to cool, to cool back off. All those things. But how important is it for you to do what I ask you to do? You need to pay more attention. Oh, okay. They'll start blocking you out if all you do is keep yelling at them about the refrigerator. I went through that. Now, I wasn't yelling, but I would just say, close the refrigerator, close the refrigerator, close the refrigerator. When you take the time to actually sit down with the child or the person and say, this is not acceptable behavior. You don't leave the door open and be standing across the room making a sandwich.
Right.
You know, I mean, it was getting out of control. So I'm finding myself, rather than allowing myself to get out of control, to confront the issue as a good example, that this is how you do things. I had mentioned my daughter when she was younger. I would always explain everything to her. Mm-hmm. Well, now she is the most reasonable person. You know, I mean, she reasons through, she logically thinks of situations. I saw that example, her following through with that. She was the best debater, and even in kindergarten, her kindergarten teacher said she was teaching the class about the word debate. You know, in kindergarten. And so anyways, it makes a difference in how you respond to your children.
Right.
We are raising the next generation, and we are the adults, the grown-ups are the example. And what example are we setting with our children? I have, with the foster children and the adopted kids, there's different ones in the mix. Mm-hmm. And I have one that's always going, oh my God, oh my God. And he's getting on my last nerve, okay?
Yep.
He's 11. I'm like, don't use that, don't say that, come on, don't say that. Well, a couple of weeks ago, the 3-year-old comes in, sprinted, he's getting on my last nerve, oh my God. The 3-year-old.
Wow.
Now, does he understand what nerves are?
Nope.
Does he understand what he was saying?
Probably not.
He understood, he had already put 1 and 2 together, that when she was upsetting him, that was what was causing the nerve problem for the other one, right?
Yep.
He had put 1 and 2 together, because he always said, oh my God, and he's getting on my last nerve when they were at a battle.
Yep.
So now I've got this 3-year-old coming in there saying this, and I went, you don't need to say that, and it triggered that thought. It was just a couple of days before you talked to me about the show and the topic, and it really made just a huge example of what we're saying is the example that we set, and they are a product of their environment. Mm-hmm. Whatever they are seeing is going in. To redirect that, once it's a habit for them, if you let it go and go and go,
right,
that child at 13 is going to be going, oh my God, he's getting on my last nerve. That's how he's going to handle his frustration with a person. Am I right?
Yes.
He's not going to sit down and say, you know what, she keeps doing this and it's really bothering me, Mom. How can I, how do I address this to get her to stop doing that? My older daughter, that was how she would, and I would handle things. Mm-hmm. We need to sit down and discuss this. And she would come to me, Mom, I have an issue with this kid at school. What am I going to do? And we would reason through it. She didn't go, oh my God, Mommy, he's getting on my last nerve. She never would have dreamed of saying that. But she wasn't in that same environment. So anyways, that all goes back to also the boy who cried wolf.
Yep.
I've thought about that in light of this topic and subject. If you're constantly screaming at your children and yelling or raising your voice, that becomes just a common note.
Yep.
Right? And if you constantly say, close the refrigerator, or yelling at them for any reason, they're getting tuned to that, and they're not paying attention anymore. They'll start blocking out more and more of what you say. It's just like if another adult is talking to you and they keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over. Eventually, you'll start blocking out, okay, and you could be doing something else and not even listening to know what they were saying, right?
Yep.
Because you learn to block it out, certain things. The kids will block out your yelling, and it's all of a sudden, now you smack a belt on the table, you would get their attention because of the noise. It's something different. But if you yell, you got nothing. So my point in that is, not with the belt, but it was just an example of a noise that's different. How would you recognize it if it chimes differently?
Well, I can give you an example about that, and I may have explained this to you before because we've had so many groups together. There was a lady that I was working with some parenting groups on how to deal with some situations we were talking about. children leaving stuff all over the house.
Mhm.
And she said she has spent weeks and months, if not years, hollering and screaming.
Mhm.
What do I do? What do I do? And now these kids are getting 10, 11, 12, 13.
Right, they're hollering back.
And they're still doing it. Well, what we got her to realize is there really is no consequences for their actions,
Mhm.
because all she does is holler.
Mhm.
And hollering is acceptable now to them.
Right.
So it doesn't become a consequence anymore. So
Right.
there's no motivation for them not to do it.
Mhm.
She said, what do I do? And without us committing to anything, we sort of said, you got to become creative.
Mhm.
You can't become illegal, but you've got to become creative. You can't beat them, hit them with sticks, but you
don't want to. It's not going to get
but
you
you
the
got to
result.
become very, very
They're going to learn to
creative.
hit and kick and.
And if they like, and what we did suggest, because we knew what we had in mind, but we didn't want to tell her because she had to think of it herself, was that if they like their clothes where they are all over the house on the floor, maybe that's where they should stay. And that's all we said. Well, she couldn't figure that out for a while. She went home and she said, I thought about this, and she came back the next 2 sessions, and she said, the problem has been solved. We said, what did you do? And all the other parents were there excited because she fixed a problem they're still having.
Mhm.
She said, I went around and I told them I'm through hollering. I'm not going to holler anymore. That's be done. I'm tired of hollering at you. You're not listening to me.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is not making any difference. So I'm telling you this last time today, pick your clothes up. You can throw them in your room and close the door. As long as I can't see them, I'm okay. I'll give you that much. But I want them out of the living room, off the kitchen table, off the kitchen floor. I want them gone. Nothing happened. They didn't do anything. She knew they wouldn't because there's no consequences. So when they went to school, she took a hammer and nails and went around the house and nailed everything where it was right in place.
That's extreme.
It's extreme. It's extreme.
Holes in my floor.
But she nailed it to the floor, nailed it to the counter, nailed it to this, nailed it to that. She nailed everything where it was in place and left them there. And didn't say anything when they come home. It wasn't until one of them went to pick something up that they needed, they couldn't get it off the floor. They got upset. Well, she just told them, that's where you like it. I'm okay with it there now. It can stay there. But I want to wear it. Well, if it was in your room, in your drawer, you'd have it. If it's on the floor, that's where it can stay. They had spent a whole day and a half pulling nails out of the floor, getting all their stuff back, and she said it never happened again. Now, you're right, it's very extreme. And not many
Staple
parents...
gun, maybe.
Well, whatever. But not many parents would go to that
I'm a
extreme.
remodeler.
But she got creative
Mhm.
and found a way to solve the problem.
The biggest thing she did, Mike, is she took a different approach.
Yep.
If what we're doing isn't working, stop, step back,
Right.
take another look, ask yourself the questions. Why is this a problem? What is the problem? Can I fix it? Am I supposed to fix it? And ask ourselves, I used to use the who, what, when, why, where,
Yep,
and how.
yep.
Okay? And just ask myself questions. Who is responsible for this? How am I handling it? Why did it happen? Why is it not resolved yet? And then I would think about the whys, all the why questions I could come up with. And that's a good way to narrow it down and get to the root of the problem, because sometimes the problem isn't the child leaving their shoes in the living room. The problem is that the approach in getting them to stop
Right.
is not right.
Well, what happened after that was, because this counseling session went on for like a year, she came back and said that they ended up talking with her about what happened.
Mhm.
And they admitted that now they don't know what the consequences will be,
Mhm.
because they now know she's creative.
Mhm.
And if they do something wrong or inappropriate, they now have to think, what could the consequences be? And they told her they are now thinking before they do things, and they're talking amongst themselves. It was 3 kids. They're talking amongst themselves, well, if we do that, what is she going to do?
Mhm.
Because now they don't know.
Right.
They knew, she had it laid out. They knew exactly what each reaction would be for her behavior, for everything they did wrong.
Yeah.
she changed, like you said, she changed that overnight.
Yep.
And now they know, I'm presuming this went on with their life because this was years ago, that if you don't know what your own mom's going to do for a consequence, how do you expect to know what the policeman's going to do, or the judge is going to do, or somebody, your boss is going to do? You have to start thinking, if I do this as an adult or as a person, what are my consequences going to be?
Yep.
And people also need to understand, and we cover this a lot, that consequences are both positive and negative. I mean, you get a paycheck every week because you go to work. That's consequences for your actions.
Right.
That's a positive thing. You go in jail for breaking the law. That's a negative consequence. So consequences also need to be taught, that there's positive and negative consequences. But in learning the behaviors to become a mature adult, to think before you act, to think before you talk, to hold other adults accountable, is something that I don't think we teach enough. And I understand, and we talked about this in the last show, that you have 2 working parents, or one parent, single parent, who has to work to support the family. They come home tired. They come home exhausted, and I understand that. I was like that for a while, and I ended up getting my kids in a divorce, and I ended up as a single parent, as a dad. And it didn't work out for a while. It was pretty rough.
Yeah.
Until they trained me how to teach them.
Right.
So that worked out. They were older, so it was pretty good. But how do we as an adult instill maturity thinking in young people? How do we, and there's a way to do it, don't get me wrong.
Teaching them
Yeah.
as we go,
Yeah.
by example, and how we handle every situation in life. We are the example. We're teaching them how to behave, how to reason, how to think by our actions and the way we handle and talk to them.
Yep, and you were talking earlier about people with students, educated students, or adults that are 30 and below with lack of maturity, or the Bible says after 30 is when you have ability to make rational decisions and
Well,
be
you become
mature.
at a different level of maturity.
But I deal with in my counseling practice interns and people who want to become counselors with their lack of maturity. They're very educated, and
Right.
in a lot of cases,
But they're not experienced.
they-
Experience can only come from
Yeah.
maturity,
And
time.
they have sometimes more education than me.
Right,
But I've got years and years and years of practice
right.
that I can give on, pass on to them. But sometimes it's really tough with these young guys and girls, because they come in with their fixed opinions on how to deal with issues that we deal with on a lively basis
Right.
in our counseling practice on a daily basis, and without thinking about the maturity part about it. What's the long-term consequences of their suggestion to these parents? And sometimes it's really tough to deal with these educated, immature adults. And that's a whole nother ballgame, because they really believe they know what they're talking about.
That was.
Now, we've got about a minute left, so I see, and we're going to have to go on another show to carry this on to finish your notes, because I like your notes. You talked about the boy that cried wolf, and maybe we can start the next show off with that one.
Okay.
And just see where we go with that, and then yelling at a loud voice. And with that, I want to say thank you from Mike Siver and Carrie Sluter, and we look forward to seeing you on the next show.